But first, to return to a subject that came up last week. Should licence fee evasion be a criminal offence, which it currently is? A parliamentary campaign to the effect that it shouldn't be appears to be gathering pace, and now has upwards of 150 MPs signed up, including some really pretty prominent names: David Davis, Zac Goldsmith, Cheryl Gillan, Austin Mitchell, Frank Field and Sir Min Campbell amongst them. And even David Cameron's now said to be taking an interest. The BBC, meanwhile, fears such a move could increase evasion and cost it as much as £200 million a year in lost revenue, and just when it's already decided to chop BBC Three. The man who started it is Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire, Andrew Bridgen, and he joins me now. Andrew, many thanks indeed for coming.
Hi there.
Why do you think, I mean, this idea has been around on and off as long as I can remember. Why do you think it's catching on now?
I think, well, as I understand it, the licence fee's been around since about 1946, and I just think it's had its day. I think at the end of this Charter review, I just don't think, well, the will of Parliament is across all parties that it's disproportionate. And I think when we see figures like 1 in 9 of all magistrates' cases being prosecution of licence fee evasion and sending 51 people a year to prison, I mean, I think my constituents in North West Leicestershire would just rather we put burglars in prison rather than old ladies who can't afford to pay the licence fee. And I think if they can't afford to pay the licence fee at £145.50, they probably can't afford to pay a £1,000 fine.
OK, you say old ladies, and indeed I read a piece that you wrote, I think, on Conservative Homes, talking about how this had a, quote, disproportionate impact on women with children detained by the state. Do you know who it is, in fact, that's being locked up?
I don't, but what I am hearing...
Does anybody?
Well, since I started this campaign a few weeks ago, I've been contacted by a lot of JPs who say that they really resent having to lock poor people up for being poor. That's their crime, and they've urged me to get on and get this through. So,
but these are people who I'm guessing at this. And the BBC were in here last week in the form of James Pennell, Director of Strategy, and I think he said was the effect of a lot of these people are in all sorts of trouble with all sorts of things, and licence fee evasion is just one of the things. And of course, failing to pay your licence fee is not in itself a criminal offence.
No, it's failing to pay the fines.
It only becomes a criminal offence when you fail to do what the court says.
But if someone has no money and you're criminalising them for being poor, if they can't pay £145.50, I doubt they can pay £1,000. The fact is, I mean, you know, if we were to hear of a banana republic somewhere that announced that the government there announced they were going to introduce a poll tax for access to television for all their citizens, regardless of income, backed up by criminality, and most of the people they locked up as a result were women with children, there'd be an outcry.
But you say that, but you don't know whether that's who they lock up.
Well, the information I've been given is that it's disproportionately women with children.
But I just asked you whether you knew who it was, and we don't.
We don't. But we know that 51 people, last year we got figures for is 2012, and 51 people were imprisoned. Which
is one a week, and clearly that's not a
And 700 people a day are prosecuted and get a criminal record.
Now, the other point that's made, and I've read this, that it's 155,000 cases. Something. It's
actually 182,000 cases.
It's a lot anyway.
And 155,000 prosecutions were upheld. So you've got around about 28,000 people who are prosecuted, taken to court, but then are found not guilty.
Now, again, I think partly because these are often people who have multiple problems with money and debts and one thing and another, but also because of the way they're dealt with. Although it's a very large number, as you say, 1 in 9 cases, I think, in terms of court time, the BBC say the best estimate they can get is it's about 3%. Now, that's not to minimise the significance of the people who end up there, and goodness knows who'd want to be locked up, but nevertheless, the idea that it is a huge burden on the process and the courts is perhaps somewhere wide of the mark.
Well, I think it's a huge burden on the people who are prosecuted. You've basically got 155,000 of our citizens who are getting a criminal record and will have to disclose that when they go for a job interview or whatever else for non-payment of a poll tax of £145.50.
Do you accept that if this move were made, that there would be an increase in evasion?
That depends what measures the BBC take to collect the money. And most organisations do not have the fallback position of criminality for protecting their income stream.
That's true, but in fairness to the BBC, they can switch off the service.
Well, I mean,
pay for it.
Well,
but
yes.
the BBC can't do that.
Well,
it's a bit like the police, isn't it? If I don't pay my taxes, it's not that I get burgled. The police don't say, "Oh, you haven't paid your taxes, we're not coming around." You can't switch the BBC off.
No, you can't. But I mean, the point of my original amendment was to test the sentiment of the House of Commons for decriminalisation. I think we've seen what that sentiment is, and we've had a debate about it. The BBC have been involved in that debate. It's been in all the media. Now, what I'm planning to do is actually come up with a way of delivering that in a way that takes account of the fact that we can't decriminalise tomorrow because the BBC have no other system in place.
So what would you suggest the BBC do then? If it's electricity and gas, for example, if people can't pay, then they'll put in prepayment meters and so on and so on. Well, essentially, if you don't pay, you don't get eventually.
Absolutely.
But that's not the case with the BBC, given the way it's
No, but there are steps the BBC could take to get to there, and they will need some time, and these will need...
Like what?
Need to be discussed. Well, it may be potentially, but what if the BBC were given the powers to ensure that third-party providers, such as Sky or Virgin Media, would have to cut off their services to people who hadn't paid the licence?
But are the people who get into trouble with this likely to be Sky and Virgin subscribers, since that, by definition, requires you to have quite a bit more money than the BBC pays, charges?
Well, you're presuming then that that everyone that doesn't pay can't pay, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, you're saying your evasion rate's 5%. You actually don't know who those 5%
the BBC say
are.
That is. I mean, I'm not the BBC, I should say here, but in this connection.
In this connection, yeah, we're very close. So
in their room, shall we say? Yeah.
So I would say to the BBC that it is no longer a matter of will decriminalisation happen. I'm actually convinced it will, and I will drive it through. It's a matter of how and when, and that how has to accommodate that the BBC needs some time to come to a different system. That may be that it may decide it wants to find a different way of funding its income stream.
Well, I mean, the only thing I could think of is something that resembles what might be called subscription. In other words, some system whereby if you don't pay, you don't get. Is that what you're suggesting? Somehow or another
I'm not suggesting to the BBC or what their future income stream will be derived from.
But fundamentally,
they will need one. But what I'm saying is that criminalising people who can't afford to pay will not be part of it.
But fundamentally, that if it's not to result in massive increase in evasion, there has to be a penalty for not paying. And if by switching from criminal to civil, and I take all your arguments for why that may be the right thing to do, unless it's accompanied by some system that switches people off who don't pay, which, call it what you will, is a completely different way of doing things. I'm trying to get leave aside the nuts and bolts of any system. Would you go along with that?
Yes, I would. But ultimately, I mean, it is a poll tax, and it is a very regressive tax. There is no, if people generally in difficulty, financial difficulty, they have reduced or no council tax to pay, where there is no relief in any respect, regardless of income, for the television licence.
But this is an argument against the licence fee, full stop.
Yeah, and I think the BBC's got to have a wider debate about the licence fee now as technology moves on. 10 years ago we didn't have smartphones, we didn't have iPads. The BBC needs to move into the 21st century as regards as what media it'll be charging for to get its income stream. It's going to be left behind.
I suppose listeners might listening to you speaking now might be thinking, hang on a second, there's another agenda running here which has got something to do with the BBC and the licence fee, notwithstanding everything you say about criminalisation, which might well be wrong.
No, but I think any responsible business entity with technology in your area moving forward so rapidly, you've got to have that, and this is an ideal time to have it.
Okay, I've read, again, other people say this, I don't know whether you adhere to this. There is a suggestion that you'll get your amendment through, let's say, that it would give the government the power to make this change, but the BBC is saying it should be part of a charter review discussion. You've said give the BBC time to kind of sort themselves out. This has been described as a bargaining chip.
No.
Is that how you see it?
Not at all, because I will be endeavouring, and I'm not going to let it be used as a bargaining chip. What I'm going to say, trying to engineer, is that whatever happens at next charter review, criminalising people for non-payment of whatever the income stream is will not be part of it. So it's not going to be on the table as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think that anything less than that will not be acceptable to colleagues who've signed my amendment.
Do you think that this is going to result in a significant reduction of revenue to the BBC? That they say if the evasion rate doubles from what it is at the moment, 5% to 10%, that's 200 million quid.
That will only happen if the BBC don't in the time they will have between now, we're having the discussion, and I think they probably know what the will of Parliament is. I mean, the Prime Minister even has given an indication, so I think that's a fairly good indication of where the direction of travel of the legislation is going to be. Between now and when it comes into force, the BBC have got to start doing some thinking. But I urge the BBC not to think that criminalising poor people who can't pay the licence fee is a way forward, because it's not. Then the House is not going to stand for it.
OK. Andrew Bridgen, many thanks indeed for joining us.